The Third Age. So the blood flood came across the world. It drowned cities, it ruined literature, it buried temples. The land itself was scarred, and for the rest of its history, our planet would find marshes filled not with water, but with blood. The dwarves retreated to their holds to live as dwarves do. The rest of mortality found itself in an infant state. Literally. It was as if all the adults had died, and only a handful of babies survived. Lost in time, these children had to raise each other, with the gods showing their hands only when absolutely necessary. This first generation was a clean slate for mortality, turning them into the things they would naturally be, even more naturally than they were in the First Age. There was neither a war in heaven nor a monetary system to oppress them. But there were the horrors of the New World, the world left to them by Sylvais, and those that could not adapt died. The hobgoblins reasserted themselves as rulers. The orcs went back to their tribal ways, but the majority of mortality found itself in equality. These societies did not know patriarchy, class, or money, but they did know hunger. They did know wild animals. They did know monsters. They did know sleepless nights. The Orc Society was given to them by Haruk Bator. It is extremely hierarchical and warlike, though it is also very personalist. We will discuss their tendency of social organization elsewhere, as it is what they commonly, but not exclusively, go for. Similarly, hobgoblins simply manage to make themselves the leaders of other mortals, as they have always done. The hobgoblins did not interfere too deeply in how these societies were run, ruling the way that the specific race needed to be ruled. They merely asserted themselves as the final judge, a person to be held in awe, and to be given the first pick of everything, while working the least, as is the way of the aristocracy. Mortality awoke to find itself in a world dead set against it. Ancient ruins, from the time of aliens to relics of Alsaeans, to scars from the war in heaven to elven towers, dotted the land. These forts and abandoned cities sometimes provided some with shelter and magical power, other times with pain and suffering after triggering some trap. Remnants of the blood flood, not just the blood marshes, but angry spirits filled with hate, chased mortality. The animals were fierce predators, but worse were the monsters, especially when one considers all the elven experiments that Sylvais set free. Then, one must remember that the gods themselves prevented these people from becoming too magical, or from advancing beyond mere stone and bone tools. In these conditions, only 57% of mortals would reach 15, and only 64% reached 45. This is true even for the elves. But don't forget that these creatures were just like you and I. Although they had a foreign ideology and custom, they still had our sense of horniness and toilet humor, feelings and emotions, but also pragmatism and introspection. So it is no wonder they did what they needed to do to survive, which in this case meant living cooperatively and without property. Obviously, the language changed over time, albeit slowly. Here, the lingua franca of the ancient elves, simply called Elvish, was lost. The entire society raised the young. There was no father, and the mother was simply a woman one was paired with. We will discuss in depth what exactly family meant to them later in the section called The Rise of Patriarchy. Sex was for pleasure, camaraderie, and love. It was the most selfish and selfless thing one could do. They all had ritualized sex with each other, with no care for incest. In fact, even sex with one's own parents went in and out of vogue throughout the Third Age. There was of course a sexual division of labor among many of the mortals, but man the hunter and woman the gatherer is a myth that we must expunge from our minds. The band size of the mortals typically consisted of 20 to 50 people, who all were part of a regional unit which would meet semi-regularly. Typically they would, quote, control some 130 square kilometers. This regional unit was composed of anywhere from 4 to 10 bands, and was itself part of a larger organization called the tribe. Oftentimes, angels, empyreans, saints, certain Nephilim and Niflheim, and even a group of fairies would come to this tribe during their meetings, or perhaps send an incarnation to lead these meetings, though all had the right to speak. and the people would worship. Such is the origin of many a genus loci. But most often, gods and spirits would inhabit fetishes, idols, big rocks, and possibly even natural features. Footnote: a spirit, like a personification of a plane, is a multinodal creature and can thus spread out across many fetishes. As a deity, a god has many persons and can thus occupy many fetishes. However, while angels, Nephilim, and other non-deity denizens of heaven are able to occupy a fetish, this is the only thing they may do, as they have only one person. End footnote. There were nymphs, the coalescing of the ancestors, and ghosts that either possessed or permanently merged their being with the idols, stones, etc. The gods would even tell mortals to fashion themselves a chest that they would inhabit and follow the mortals around in. Only special holy men and shamans could commune with the gods, and the existence of these idols was highly important for the perfunctory rites of those primitive meetings. Rival bands or tribes might raid each other to take not just food, but also command of these fetishes. They were a migratory people, following the seasonal behavior of the plants and animals, abandoning the mess they made and trash they accumulated. They were small enough and gone long enough nature herself would simply take care of it, an unhealthy thing for a mother to foster. Though these mortals did not have marriage, they would sometimes exchange youths, and as it happened, the tribes with the most genetically diverse people, i.e., the ones who practiced incest the least, became the most developed. Thus, mortals constantly, through natural selection, preferred this exogamic practice at this stage of population density. However, the gods, or some cultic force, would intervene if they became too strong and reinforced incest, especially between parent and child, if they developed too quickly, if they became too strong. I, your god, am a jealous god. Each band created for itself its own set of rituals, sometimes naturally adapted, sometimes wholly invented by one person, sometimes revealed by some spirit or angel. They passed these down most faithfully. These rites also came to influence the whole of their tribe, and separate rites were made for each level of organization, which then came to influence the particular religion of the band. They did sometimes raid each other and war with each other, but times of meetings were sacred times. There was to be diplomacy instead of death. However, one could not be sure that this ceasefire would apply to a Farlander. They lived cooperatively, but not with everyone. When one of their own put them in danger, even if it was not the fault of that person, even if they were a victim, they exiled or killed that person. They knew not of personal liberty or fairness. Such concepts never crossed their minds. What they did know was the survival of the pack. They lived without leaders. When time came to make a decision, to put the best man at the job, they would appoint him. But they were distrustful people. They would demand the leader resign as soon as possible. They did not love their democracy. They didn't view it as this abstract good, that it was beautiful because it meant that everyone else could speak. Footnote on democracy. Nor was this a proper democracy. End footnote. Rather, they loved that they themselves could personally speak, that they could promote their individual thoughts and interests. As they knew only equality and could not afford slavery, everyone else also secured for themselves this right. Each were jealous, only giving in to meritocracy when needed, and as society was not so complex, as there was scant division of labor, such a thing almost never came up. There were those of whom I will simply call holy men, though, be they of any gender. Some were selected by spirits, gods, cult forces, or natural inclination. They would live within, but outside the tribe. They would not be a foreigner to it, but nor would they have a say in the decisions of just one tribe, for if that leader speaks, that leader dies. These people became tribal mystics, who helped regulate the tribe, who discerned actions, who had connections to dark and wicked things, to heavenly and delightful things, that a regular person of the time could not handle. They severed their relationship with their tribe to be a better part of it. At adolescence, age 12 to 14 for most races, They would undo the binding ritual between child and parent, which at that time was the band itself. Here was the rediscovery of that most powerful and ancient of magics, music and song. First, it merely recorded instructions for how to perform some labor. Footnote: this usage persisted well beyond the Third Age. Even now, many at the Arcanus write some tract or mathematical algorithm in verse. End footnote. Doing it in a melodic way, in a system that was so linguistically restricted that it guided the listener into guessing the next word and phrase, really helped the people remember the correct technique of the weave. In addition, it was a joyous and communal way to pass the time. Secondly, then, some stood out. Their music was not the rough shanty of the worker, but the culmination of raw talent and disciplined training. These singers were invariably made into holy men and shamans, and they sung of the regalia and the heritage. But they found their song could soothe the spirits. Their voice could command heaven. Their music beat to the drums of the Arcanus. They learned a very powerful magic. It must be strange to hear there were no leaders. Footnote: except, of course, for the unlucky ones beholden to a hobgoblin. The hobgoblins stationed themselves always as the leader of their gatherings and rituals, yet above it. Speech was restricted, but they were not yet master and slave. End footnote. Surely, they still mixed with dragons, empyreans, elementals, jinn, giants, fae, shadows, somehow spirits, nymphs, and other such extra-material creatures, producing the Anon. Surely, the gods still sent one of their persons to be immortal, to have that person act as a soul to that body, producing the Avatar. Well, that is true. The Anon and the Avatar still existed. Sometimes they were made to be the holy men, devoting themselves to the study of the other worlds and bringing back wisdom for the tribe. But they were mostly kept within the tribe as a speaker, a warrior, an artist. Though they were a paramount people who were perhaps favored in many regards, both sexually and economically, they did not constitute a separate caste, nor were they even leaders. When the tribe starved, they starved. They were not different from the rest. They occupied the same social role as any other person. They were just better at it. These people who had so little, who produced little surplus, who organized in such small groups, simply did not have room for that. Is it not right that the one who has more talents gives more? Who says that the strong, smart, and competent are the ones who get to be in charge? One can think of many counterexamples. They would exchange goods and technology with Farlanders, sometimes even learn from them. They would have to consult their spiritual guides, of course, so that such a technology did not incur the wrath of any powerful being. They did know technology. The gods allowed them that. They knew how to construct stone tools. They knew of the axe, but they did not yet know hafting. They knew how to cut and carve wood. They could create rafts for themselves. They had some very simple drapes and loincloths they could use for clothing, with simple geometric symbols and patterns on them. Actually, some of the most important technologies were created at this time. They learned a few power words. The ability to shave, trim, and shape hair by applying a special ointment that is set ablaze. The ability to create a dust that would repair small tears and cracks when wiped away. The oil that one rubs over their body and finds themselves cleaned after muttering some prayer. A simple hymn to clear the head of lice. To cause a small and wispy flame just by snapping one's fingers. Basic healing potions. Hymns and herbs that make childbirth and other associated actions safe and inconsequential. At least for the woman. Footnote: infants must become ensouled before being able to be protected by these magics, and so one still saw a high infant mortality rate. This is true today, and has only been abolished in space. End footnote. These were all invented at that time, and without this knowledge, the mortal races would surely have perished. Some tribes would embark on quests that would especially please the gods. A few things happened. The god might leave them gifts at some holy place. These gifts may include some golden idol or a crate containing jewels. These treasures may contain obsidian knives. Some metallic armor the people then did not yet understand. A wooden baton, sometimes spiked. Magical silver rings which offered invisibility or protection. An amulet which gave them breath where breath cannot be found. a staff which gave them command over beasts, perhaps something as trivial as much needed food or a certain potion. These material items needed to be protected, and it was not uncommon to try and steal them from another tribe. Not only did it grant legitimacy, but one saw these artifacts in battle. Footnote: of course, as these things go, it may never see combat. The tribe may be too unwilling to risk the loss of such a device, and so it would stay as a fetish in their holy grounds. Of course, a lack of such a powerful tool may cause them to lose the skirmish, which ironically means they lose the weapon itself. End footnote. Of course, any tribe who tried to understand these things, who studied these things, would incur the wrath of the gods and spirits when they were discovered. All other tribesmen would instinctively know, or were perhaps told, to go to this area and loot these people's treasures. Other times, some cultic force or demon army would simply wipe these people out. Such was the life of the Third Age. There were spillages from the occult war, of course, groups which were not directly involved in it, but were possibly impacted by it. Some were set up by occult warriors, even hired by them, to serve some mundane purpose or to act as a recruitment ground. Footnote on hired. Well, not always with a wage, and very rarely with money. It is more like a series of front groups and organizations offering some manner of support. End footnote. Some of these groups will exist in the Fifth Age, but at this time, there were 4 prominent such groups: the Stargazers, the Headhunters of Anas, the High Council of Blood Elves, and the mighty Deathstalkers. The Stargazers were the proto-magicians, and oft connected to the Keepers of Secrets. They were not really magicians, having no real theory of magic. They believed all magics to follow from some god. They did not really understand the notions of planes and other planets. They did not see how divine and arcane magic are distinct, and to them, there was no difference between elemental beings and spirits. They considered fire and the phases of the moon, the position of the stars, and the astrological period to all have been the same thing. They did not have an idea of mathematics, just practical ritual prescriptives. They were not great wizards and witches, but they were the best that any had. They had a hodgepodge of skills and spells they would use. They knew some herbology. They knew some healing powers. They knew the prayers of the tribe they were connected to. They knew how to bargain with other beings. They are the source of the wizard and witch, priest and druid, engineer and elementor, fae and shadowcaster. They preserved the oral traditions of the people. They were able to look at the stars to figure out which days were auspicious. They led quests and prepared rites. They kept their own rudimentary calendars and offered advice on how to construct things at just the right angle so that one of the suns would shine their beams on some day in some way. They warned them of the dangers of going to certain places. And here, they rediscovered the vision quest. It is not at all a primitive thing, for as the state gets more advanced, the rites get more advanced. It need not be extravagance either, for certain spirits may be summoned by calmness. There are things that have happened in the materium which leave a mark, a scar, on it forever. There are things that happened in the other planes that become such a fruitful story they live on forever. These stories do not always need to be true, and one may actively tell a new tale. In fact, one may go on a new quest to establish a new myth. They may actively distort the thing to create a new myth, a new story, and to an extent, a new history. For it is said that history is written by the victors, and we don't mean made. It isn't even the case that the myth needs to be known, though that certainly helps. These can be unlocked most especially through the vision quest. The quester may fast, they may overeat, they may imbibe, they may drink the sacred mescaline tea, they may find a gnomish alchemist, they may sweat, they listen to tales and are the master of them. They do these things to put themselves in a new state of mind, to induce an out-of-body experience. Around them surrounds people wearing costumes and makeup, and they make chants. They have cool-looking amulets that do nothing but put you in a mood. They talk in funny ways, usually archaic. Footnote: for what we think of as archaic was once contemporary, and they had their own version of archaic. End footnote. They hail you as the god. They treat you like you're somebody else. The crowd watches in speculation, and they are a part of it. They dress up like serpents and paint their faces blue. But now the quester has entered the spirit world. They do not see a painted lady. They actually see what she represents. The quester has been transported to a strange world of history and prophecy. They must do this right, for it is dangerous. One can easily be led astray and lose their mind. One can also be led astray and find themselves in the underworld. But if all goes well, they gain magics, some powerful treasure, some new knowledge, some form of legitimacy, some ability. It has never fallen out of vogue. I am become you. I should also note that a spirit itself could embark on a vision quest. Back then, the Stargazer led this, and when they were not the vision quester, they guided the hero. These poets and witch doctors, who knew which herb was poisonous, saw only magic in all things, even, if not especially, the materium. They could chart the seas and wander the forests using only the sky. They did not need to call upon the Locapela to build shelter. But of course, not knowing that natural and material magics were distinct, they did anyway. In their conception, the will of the gods, spirits, and clans became something of a separate entity, like how the Neoplatonists think that the thought of the monad became the dyad. This will was to be identified with natural phenomena. Objects do not fall to the ground because this is the will of the gods, but because this phenomenon itself was will itself. We find this as a spiritual prefiguration of Dharma, fate, and Maat. But others would say that this is simply mortality's first approximation. You must recall that the words sacrosanct and sacrilege underlie the same idea. Footnote: consider the name of the Masjid al-Haram. Consider the common etymology of hostile and host. End footnote. We must understand not the meaning of the word profane in language, but the thing which binds together that which is sacred and that which is profane. It is not a linguistic metaphor, but an objective observation of that which is itself understood through a subjective and imperfect lens. A single stargazer would serve multiple bands, and even tribes. Though the tribes were small, even the bands had different takes on the same basic stories and rituals. It was the stargazer's job not to syncretize or explain them, but to know them and perform them in their proper context. When these tribes came into conflict, the stargazer did not serve as an intermediary. Instead, when peace was declared and grudges were forgiven, the stargazer served as a ritual pole. He was never part of any tribe, and yet was in all of them. He became both sacred and profane, untouchable, yet fed and clothed by all. He never belonged anywhere, and yet he was a full member of them all. Everyone recalled that he was an apprentice from some tribe, even he, but he insisted he must sever the ties if he was to have this power. There were astrological events that filled these stargazers' minds with a longing. They did not know it, but during these times, they would travel through spirit and dream and lay and boat, going vast distances. They would find themselves in some ancient elven ruin in the twilight hours holding coven. Looking around, they saw all manner of far-landing stargazers. They would direct their power together and become one with their thoughts. They would form a chain, and this link would act as a conduit. They would become one, fusing their magics, and they would hold court. In these gatherings, all mortal sorcerers were connected. These types of societies relied on oath-making, and an important group came about: the headhunters of Anas. Their origins are shrouded in mystery, O chimerics of the tall humans. Some say that the powers of Anas spread out unconsciously and fill the spirits of some mortals. Others say the other gods sponsor this cult, knowing it well regulates mortality. Still, some claim they are an offshoot of the Society of Vril that became more and more interested in mundane agendas. Still, it is undeniable that they are directly assisted and guided by angels and saints of Anas. The headhunters of Anas are supremely mystic warriors who have great enhancements. Sometimes they engage in simple reconnaissance. Other times, they strip completely naked and brazenly go headhunting. Burgeoning states might grow to hate this, but they find that the headhunters can circumvent many defenses. You can try to slay them all, but another band might declare you criminal too. But what is the law? On this, even the gods disagree. Silvius had been the first to say, quote, "Though the heavens might fall, let justice be done," end quote. But he was in for a surprise when Aoife betrayed him. He abandoned who he was and spent the Second Age reinventing himself. When he initiated the blood flood, he introduced a new maxim. There are times when the simple application of law is not enough, when noble men must act. We must be vigilant and take justice directly into our hands. In the Third Age, he became the first of the gods to explicitly separate the concept of justice from the concept of law. The law does not exist above society, but justice does. You decide who you work for, justice or the law. Kunirama believes that the law is made by the lawyers, the judges, and the politicians. Each of these groups conspire to keep the people, whether they be old or young, rich or poor, down. The law itself is exploitation, designed to cover up the whims of madmen. So, how can we respond? We must ourselves be madmen who follow the whims of the day. Kunirama teaches that we should know the law, so that we may find some contrivance to escape it. The law does not exist above society, it is made by it. Justice is a farce. Lucifer teaches that the law is made by the rulers to oppress the ruled. This itself is the nature of justice. He does not think it an open conspiracy. He has a special hatred for the corrupt politician. You must be part of something greater, and you must promote it consistently. The law must be ironclad, and it must punish all those who oppose it. Those who are oppressed deserve it, else they would not be oppressed. It is the vanquished who are wicked. The law must be complex, so that the elite may play games with it while the poor suffer on their boot. Simultaneously, there must be enough room for the state to still be able to reel in the big fishes if they collectively so choose. The law does not exist above society, it is made by it. This is justice. Siddiq teaches that everything follows the law, and that the law is mutable. The law itself determines how to promote new laws. It is illegal to usurp the throne, but once that usurper becomes king, his word is now law. The law changes, but let's punish the ones who did break the laws which are no longer the law. They threaten the very fabric of society itself. It is not that the law is just, it is that justice itself is the law. It is natural for there to be the strong and the weak, and the purpose of the law is so that the strong may not injure the weak. This is justice. But Siddiq goes even farther. He views the natural laws of the planes the same. The sublime is the legislator and judge. For him, this means these natural laws are not only mutable, they are breakable. The universe itself operates so that the strong may not harm the weak, and the sublime may alter this as time goes on. Those who break it, who find a way to do the impossible, they must answer before it. Siddiq believes that he is the highest emanation of the sublime, and that he alone can find the way to tabulate these laws, so that others might see. Haruk Bator considers keeping one's oath in all situations to be a worthless thing to do, while generally one should mock the weakling who couldn't hold his promises. There are times of power and strife where notions of honor must be suspended. Oaths can only really be sworn by people of equal power, he says. Everything else is a dominance play. Haruk Bator also considers it immoral that you could harm someone, and instead of their retaliation, they go to some other person. Then this person sends some officer who brings you before some court, all for your fate to be decided by someone completely unrelated. He finds this a total perversion of what is right and proper. Societies must be small and parochial, and you must concern yourself with what is yours, and what is about to be yours. Any who do anything to threaten this, to even suggest something that might cause this, should be executed. Strife is not bad, but certain struggles must be destroyed. This is justice. Anas taught Silvius, Kunirama, Lucifer, and Siddiq, and also Haruk Bator. Reports vary on if Haruk Bator was his best or worst student. Always one of those extremes. Haruk Bator taught his son, Miligarn. Anas's attitude appears to have changed ever since the First Age, for Anas preaches that there are in fact two laws, the ethereal and the ephemeral. The ethereal law is the law which exists above all. It acts in accordance with justice. If justice were known to people, they would realize behaving in an unjust way is itself the worst way to behave, that it would be better to be punished mistakenly than to get away with an unjust act. This ethereal law encompasses all things, from the movement of particles to the deeds of mortals to the behavior of ants. If one really learns it, they cannot help but conform to the ethereal law, as it is so great. Evidently, particles and ants have a much higher understanding of the ethereal law than us, and all of their movements are just, harmonic, and beautiful. The periodic motion of the planets, the birth and death of stars, the homeostasis of the body, the circle of life, all of these follow in accordance with the ethereal law. The ephemeral law is the actually existing law as it is actually practiced in some actually existing society peculiar to this point in space and time. It is the best possible attempt, at that time and place, to understand the ethereal law. Anas rejects the idea that laws are created to serve some economic interest, but rather, it is the incarnation of the ethereal law, and the point is to improve it. Anas accepts all sorts of methods. Sometimes we must hold a trial. Other times we must quickly execute. Sometimes we must interrogate. Other times we must torture. One may look to the opinion of a jurist, the argument of a lawyer, the precedents of past rulings, known or hidden in a library, the common law of the people, the code promoted by the state, the fatwas and edicts of kings and priests, and even, in some cases, revolution. Each of these are valid ways mortality comes to know the ethereal law, and once that is written down, once that is adopted by law, none could ever break it. So we must be firm but fair in our rulings. Justice is headless. How is a headhunter of Anas supposed to act? He must break from all of his worldly ties. He must totally devote himself to the headhunters, and he must have no conflict of interests. He must travel to dispense his justice. They must take up the vow of poverty. They take only what they need for their purposes from the towns they visit. They must abide by the rules of where they are, for they have no homelands. Their agents must hide themselves, so as to attract neither notice nor corruption. Their agents learn the law. Their spies observe the community. They must not call each other brother or sister. They have no family. No one is above suspicion. When they come to a place, they wish it peace. If it is worthy, their peace comes upon it. If not, their peace returns. They must be shrouded in secrecy and in ritual, ascending the ranks through unknown contacts and dead drops. They wait and they listen. They look for disturbers of the peace, for brigands, and most of all, for oath breakers. Then they dispense their justice. They do not talk to Anas, for his mortal followers do not know his preferred way to find and implement the true law. But the headhunters do not set out ad hoc rules for the terror. The spirit of Anas overtakes them, and they know, by instinct alone, what arguments to take, how to conduct the trial, and how to proceed. In those days of the Third Age, the ephemeral law was simple then. He who makes an oath, but does not keep it, shall lose his head. It was not just the cause of learning or the law that separated a youngster from their clan, for there was a third group, the Death Stalkers. There are 13 kinds of undead that roam the lands: banshees, ghouls, ghasts, ghosts, liches, mummies, shades, skeletons, vampires, wastewalkers, wights, wraiths, and zombies. Footnote on shades. Shades are not technically undead, but are rather souls who have been twisted by the black dungeons. Their being has been infused with shadow, which means that, unlike a ghost, one can interact with them through material means. Still, they are more translucent and misty. They are cold to the touch. End footnote. Some of these are important, as we will see with skeletons and zombies. A ghost may be in the midst of some noble quest, A malicious banshee still serves the families she haunts. The Deathstalkers regulate the undead. When it comes time to expel them, they usually destroy them, though sometimes a simple lawsuit will settle the matter. All undead have the capacity to not merely be a nuisance, but to be an existential threat. Even zombies could wipe out an entire clan. Forget about ghouls and vampires for a moment. Even wandering undead are capable of such harm. So the spirits call out to certain people and have them take up arms. While a priest of Pilar will use the light to battle the dark, this is not the way for a Deathstalker. He immerses himself in death. Blessed bone is his coat of arms. He uses blood for paint. He wears all black. His skin becomes pale and ashy. He becomes a home for diseases that seem not to bother him, while maggots become his breakfast. He leaves his old religion and joins the pantheons of death and undeath, Pluton Polydegmon, Artio Undone, and Odin's Spearside. Santa Mirte, Elazar, Morgan Bivkatha, Sakos Wados, Frigg the Weeper, and Vanth. Lord Yama becomes his greatest teacher. By the end of the Deathstalker's life, he becomes a creature of the dark. He has become them to destroy them. He knows their lore, their ways, and their habits, for they are his lore, his ways, and his habits. He eats pine needles and resins, bathes in freezing waters. The Deathstalker's psyche becomes damaged by fey magic, and shadows moralize him, just like the undead. There is no clear delineation. At one point, he himself has become a kind of mummy. It comes in a variety. Some wear their black armor, and only a skull can be seen. In space, this tradition continues. Some out there will remove limbs, eyelids, lips, and so on, replacing their bodies with some ancient clockwork machinery. But why death and undeath? Why not simply undeath? First, we must deconstruct the interrelation. Then we may reanimate it. We must expel from our minds both the vitalist and the mechanist notions of life, which are not opposites but necessarily need each other. For both vitalism and mechanism are incomplete and require a certain dualism to cover up their deficiencies. Rather, life is substance, be it elemental, arcane, heavenly, spiritual, etc., arranged in such a way that it engages in self-motion. It is not even that a dead thing does not feel, it is that a dead thing is inert. A tree does not need neurons to move its branches in response to sunlight. However, an inert, non-living thing will only move when acted upon. Life can somehow cause itself to move. Please excuse the simplicity of what I say. Please excuse that I am reduced to Aristotle's words. We cannot dwell here too long. In many ways, life is the pinnacle of substance, for it is substance that can preserve its arrangement, rather than relying on the universe, which it is not really distinct from. In this way, then, the undead are also alive. The unliving, likewise, are alive. It is not homonymy, but polysemy, words so close that they are given the same name, but are distinct. It is hard to keep it separate in one's head, and even harder to teach. Death is not simple inertness. We would never say that a piece of rubber is dead. Rather, it is that status after life. It is no more. It is gone. Now, it may happen that a body is dead, and then it is reversed through some electrochemical means. Well, in this case, Dantanos does not take the soul from the body. Why would he show it the great beyond when he knows it is to be taken back? Still, a priest may cast a powerful resurrection spell and bring the thing's soul back. Even if not, the soul walks the porcelain road. Is there continuity when they are brought back? What about that part of the soul that goes forward to the phylactery of life? So, we see that there is a true death, a true cessation, a true moment of non-existence where you are destroyed. But every second is a new spark that sets the universe aflame. Every moment we die, all things are impermanent. every moment we experience the true death and a new birth, though of course there is obviously something more final. When most people die, then their soul leaves their body. The souls of the unintelligent undead, those without souls, stop being alive in this body. The intelligent undead, those undead which retain their souls, are now different for having died and becoming undead. The moniker undead is therefore appropriate, so we are most correct when we refer to the unliving of Elenthar, god of rape and slaughter, as the unliving in contradistinction to the undead. More to the point, the destruction of an undead causes the true death in the body. Death and undeath are topics fools will connect incorrectly, but do not overcompensate and believe they have nothing to do with one another. Nor did every hero join up with those who walked the line between the sacred and the profane. There were those who embraced just the sacred. There were those who embraced the profane. They were powerful warriors, chieftains, healers, those heroes you write poems about. They too entered the echelons of these men and women. Disease was rampant, and so cults of Elazar became prominent. Stargazers prayed to keep him away. Deathstalkers embraced him in their quest. But there were tribes that actively sought out diseases. They would lick infected wounds. They would consume rotten meat and fruit. They never lasted long, but many splinter groups would hear his call. Then there were those who would get lost in the heat of the battle. They fell to Elenthar, god of rape and slaughter. They would gleefully torture and enslave people. But an Elenthari society cannot last long. Most societies couldn't absorb these cults and manage them, unlike the armies of today. So they simply banished them. Elenthar, god of rape and slaughter, found a new magic, however, in those waning moments of the Second Age, the unliving. The unliving appear as this extremely mutated being. Their skin is covered with scars and warts. They have all manner of mutations in vestigial limbs, sometimes just dangling there. A few come equipped with claws and even bone spurs. These are usually extremely painful and are a source of constant bleeding. When an unliving is harmed, they heal, but they always heal incorrectly. It is as if their body shot out string to shoddily and hastily patch itself up. If you manage to destroy an unliving, you must perform an exorcism on the remains. Else, they dissolve, and out of that refuse a newborn is born. It looks like a baby version of that same unliving, but it grows too rapidly and experiences all manner of abnormalities. If it were to slay you, you instead become unconscious, yet invulnerable. For example, if someone cuts off your head, it simply finds a way to reattach to your body, maybe in a slanted way. You can still arise from your coma, either through the intervention of your companions or natural healing. However, you have a week to get an exorcism, and you will lose your invulnerability. If you don't, you lose your invulnerability anyway, and you also lose your spirit. Your spirit is either replaced by or merged with the unholy spirit of Elenthar, the god of rape and slaughter. You can rebel against this, but it will trap your soul in a state of torture. If you choose this, your unliving body will be directed by the spirit, and your soul is siphoned to this end. The body becomes unintelligent but guided by that spirit. The only release is the destruction of the body, and an exorcism performed on the remains. Or you can submit to Elenthar, god of rape and slaughter, and become an intelligent unliving. You occupy a position in his priesthood the same way that a ghoul is of Elazar. You direct the worst of bandits and the freakiest of cults. An unliving's tie to their spirit and soul is strengthened by Fey energy, and like the living, shadow magic will hurt this connection. But it is actually shadow energy which heals their body, as it is brimming and overflowing with Fey energies, hence their name. On the other hand, for those tribes whose descendants would survive the change in Yuga, there was a great honor waiting for their best of the best. Some particularly powerful tribes, whose poems sang of good pedigree and great deeds, would produce heroes of heroes. At tribal gatherings, a messenger would come before them and baptize the chosen one in fire. They would go on for greater and more epic deeds. Some were sent to Atlantis. Here, they would retire, hunt game, and live with the remaining Nephilim. A life of contemplation and plenty, a fit retirement. Oh, to be lucky enough to have been born in this land. Some were sent to the Rosistan. The Rosistan is ruled by 7 gods, former angels of the current chief of the gods, who made 7 distinct triads, which all war with one another in this place. Here, they become a champion of a primeval pact or a peacock prince, fighting in their wars, though usually they did not convert. They braved these lands, they slew these beasts, and they came to ride dinosaurs. The bravest would be brought to serve the unnameable priest, that high priest of the 99, in Leng, that plateau connected to the dream and to Hyperborea. However, as more and more are sent to the Rosistan, there is a higher probability at least one such warrior will attain sainthood. The tribe will pray to them, and they will learn scattered esotericisms. It was in this way that certain tribes came to learn of a certain pact primeval or a certain peacock prince. As it happened, many of their warriors ended up aligning with them for some reason or another. Slowly then, this pact primeval or this peacock prince became linked to this band's regalia and heritage. Then, as they formed into greater social structures, such things merged, flourished, and died out. This is the origin of every nation's special connection to the Rosistan, which many believe must be preserved at all costs. Some were sent to Mora. Here, they attacked the denizens of this land, and were engaged in a never-ending crusade against this place and its people. None are spared, for those sent here are not the type to question why they were sent here. The Adeshni, undead, aliens, and others that make a home here could find themselves facing 100,000 warriors in one day, totally disrupting and ending any historical moment. The gods, ever since the First Age, were unable to control what happened in Mora. It is not known, but the unknown god had blasphemed the place, making it sacred to evil of any kind. This attracted the dreaded Klepoth, and made it a place holy to primordials who had succumbed to that thing called evil. Then Elenthar, the god of rape and slaughter, tried to exploit the energies here to create his race, the Adeshni, but they rebelled against him. In the Second Age, the most powerful of the Adeshni, Lai, created an empire, conquering the whole of Mora. It was in this land of Mora that Lai, utilizing residual primordial magics, completely blinded the gods to this place. Footnote on residual primordial magics, as well as evil, arcane, heavenly magic granted by Niflheim playing realpolitik against the gods, etc. End footnote. They later sent the angel Semyaza, angel of the god that failed, to deal with Lai. He did, and he killed Lai. But as he battled in Mora, he started to succumb to those words Lai taught him, and until his banishment, he told them to all who would hear. He did not pacify Mora, and much of it was still cut off from the god's love. The ancient elves, for their part, simply made treaties with the Adeshni. Though the blood flood did kill Mora, blasphemous wards and arcane rites still kept that place outside the view of the gods. Mora developed as it would, and it would have felt the 864,000 years of the Third Age unabated. But if it ever dared to touch the sky, holy hellfire would rain down upon it. It was through mad crusades that the gods kept command over that place. It was in this way that, though it felt history, it was no more than some particularly evil backwater. Consider those places beyond the ley. Yes, who knows what they are up to, but they are continuously molested by monsters. They are invaded by zealots. History is nothing more than a ruined orgasm. So while our ancestors lived in communism, we should not view them with rose-tinted glasses. I would not even say that it was 2 millennia into the Third Age that they learned the most powerful and easy of all the magics, evil. How could they not have? The temptations of demons, the remnants of the plebeian elements of ancient elven society, and the orgasmic feeling of power as another begs for the lives of themselves and their family. One did not even owe the devil their immortal soul in all cases. For some, they simply went into their debt. One learned this magic through direct discovery, raiding some other group out of necessity, and realizing that this gave them power. In fact, some came to raid simply for this power. Evil makes every word more convincing, more intimidating. Evil makes every blow more fatal, each cut more deadly. Evil lends itself to the grace of the acrobat. Evil makes the secret easier to bear. Evil lets one walk in the light as if they hide in the shadows. Evil mixes itself with the magic of the caster, granting a superiority to their spells. Evil makes one more confident, more sure of themselves, more in line with who they are supposed to be. Do not judge our ancestors too harshly, modern man. Ye are hardly different. Civilization provides protection from nature. Civilization provides man with justice and law. Civilization preserves our integrity as a community. Civilization affords man technology beyond our wildest dreams. Civilization offers protection from far-landing oppressors. Civilization unites us all together, integrating more and more people into its fold with each passing year. But how can this be without evil? Civilization means the rape of the earth, an uncaring and unsustainable extraction of its very being. Civilization throws mortals in prison, or banishes them to the woods to starve. Civilization excludes farlanders, and forces the youth to be clones of their elders. Civilization puts mortals into a parasitic social form, bleeding them of their very soul. Civilization makes war against the helpless and innocent and calls it defense. Civilization destroys the past. It destroys ancient wisdom. It annihilates entire cultures for national integrity. Civilization leaves many behind, casting them aside in a dale of pig shit. Civilization rewards those who agree with their own oppression. We cannot have one without the other. Only the naive can't accept their world was built on the deaths of others. Revenge and retribution are mere synonyms, despite what the liars and whores who call themselves elite might tell you. Yes, the murderer must be dealt with, but then you too are treating a fellow being in such an undignified way. So let it be written, so let it be done. These things, though they are not motivated by evil, cultivate it. In turn, evil itself allows one to deal with the ramifications. Not only do you soothe yourself with your own mythology, you altogether become callous and uncaring. What you did was not even wrong. It is just the way of the world which says kill and be killed. But too much of this is actually harmful to the individual. The thing you championed is no longer real people, but an abstract ideal that is now an excuse for your behavior. Soon, relations of any form become means to an end. And to what end? Natural beauty does not impact you. The finest of perfumes smell foul. Food tastes processed and fake. You revert to the state of an animal to find your joy, but you are simply going through the motions. Anhedonia disguises itself as hedonism. You are solely motivated by power, and you are lost and hopeless. You have the appearance of power, but you are actually powerless. Each time the high feels less and less intense. Each time you must radicalize yourself. Now, one can lament the personal fall of some person, but the more immediate and practical side comes from the perspective of other people. How do you, as a society, deal with such individuals? You can hardly find yourself latching on to this individual, this cruel psychopath. The society of evil is one of anarchic rule and bureaucratic incompetence. Such a society set up like this does not have the room to create, to nurture new thought, to advance. It may quickly overpower its contemporaries, but it will fall. While others advance, this place will remain poisoned by inertia and will soon be swallowed by them. Though we live in a world of open and institutionalized demon worship, of bloody-handed kings and savage inquisitors, we cannot really think that some place is wholly a place of evil. Footnote, except by an act of divine intervention. End footnote. Every state has its own wicked ways, its own en urbe, but at some point, Welfare programs must be organized for the people. Leniency must be distributed. Alternative thought must be allowed. Eventually, the personalist system of evil, of a small network orchestrating things, collapses in the face of complexity. Only a few can rule indefinitely via evil, some wicked temple which replenishes its numbers through recruitment, forced or otherwise, some small tribe of backwards people, and commonly some hero will revolt and slay the wicked and cruel chief. But even a small kingdom of evil, I would not give more than 63 years. But though evil cannot create, it can greatly accelerate progress. Once something has been discovered, evil may imbue itself into this thing and greatly spread it. Through callous and harsh policies, the state run by evil ministers accomplishes much very quickly and efficiently. But soon, the momentum dissipates, and now they act as a fetter to what they have tried to achieve. We can view history as a helical, not cyclical, process. Some entity exists. A rival has accomplished something that poses a threat to the very being of the entity. Cultic forces within our entity organize a coup from a distance, and now an evil regime takes over. The new ministers, without care for morality, reshape the face of the earth, reshape the spirits, reshape mortality itself. Soon, they have accomplished their goals, having outlived their usefulness, having ruined this entity in the name of their own greed. They are deposed by that same cultic force, but in a new name. The new ministers are different in aesthetic, but their policies are really not so different. The old ministers leave behind a bloody and thankless legacy, and their predecessors are now rehabilitated, but under a morality wholly foreign to them. Nothing is the same, not custom, not idea, nothing. The entity is rebirthed, disfigured, and yet there is continuity. The process repeats.